Octavio Paz was a great poet, great essayist, as great an essayist as a poet. And also he did a lot of translation, and he was a tremendous activist. We find his life is full of activism. He was a diplomat. He was a professional diplomat. He could not tolerate the heat. Everything went wrong in his first trip. And the letters testify that he just wanted to get out of India. But 10 years later, he came back to India in 1962. He would stay here till 1968. Such a deep engagement with Indian culture. India was a muse to Octavio Paz in all its aspects. So this deserved a book. This deserved a very special place in our history. He is part of our cultural history. Names of places and people appear in his film. There are in his poems. There are poems that are dedications to specific people. But more than that, you see, Octavio Paz is a very complex writer. In him, surrealism meets existentialism, meets Indian mysticism, Indian religious tradition, contemplative tradition. One looking at Indian history and comparing it with Aztec history. So there is a direct framework of reference, what we today call the global South dialogue. So nowadays in academia, it is very fashionable to talk about South dialogue. Nobody embodies the South dialogue in literature, in poetry, through poetic insight than Octavio Paz.
Hola y bienvenidos otra vez a mi canal de YouTube Español por Dentro. Hoy tengo un invitado muy especial que ha escrito mucho en el campo del español. Estoy aquí con el escritor, autor de la India, Indranil Chakravarty. Muchísimas gracias, Indranil, por estar aquí. Thank you so much for being here.
Encantado. I'm glad to be here.
So while Indranil Chakravarty needs no introduction in the field of Hispanic world, we still decided to do this interview in English in the interest of this reaching a larger audience, because Indranil has recently come out with a fantastic book about Octavio Paz that we are going to discuss a lot about. It's very important that we also talk a little bit about Indranil and his work before we move ahead. So I would like to say, just to give a brief intro of Indranil. Indranil Chakravarty graduated from Presidency College in Calcutta and later studied film direction at the Escuela Internacional de Cine y Televisión in Havana, Cuba, at a time when the left world was undergoing a profound collapse. Much later, Indranil earned a PhD in film from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. He has also been a Homi Bhabha Fellow, working on 2 books with several others in development. His enduring passion lies in biography, both literary and cinematic. He believes that individual lives often open doors to larger histories, and it is through such narratives that he explores the cultural dialogue between 2 regions that continue to fascinate him, India and Latin America. He has come out with a book that I just mentioned right now, The Tree Within, Octavio Paz in India, which has been published by Penguin Random House. And there is a book launch that is going to happen in Instituto Cervantes on the 11th of November. So those who are in Delhi could please go and attend that book event, which will be happening in the evening. For over 2 decades, Indranil has taught film history, analysis, and screenwriting at leading film institutes across India, including Mumbai, Pune, Chennai, and Calcutta. His professional journey has also taken him to several countries around the world. With such a fantastic body of work behind him, once again, it's an absolute honor, Indranil, for me to have you on my channel and to talk to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. It is my opportunity to talk to you.
Indranil, I would like to first start off with a question about your new book that has come out. Would like you to please show it once to our audience, the cover of the book, so that they can have a look at it.
It will get reversed. It will get reversed.
No, this is fine. Yeah, this is fine. We can see it.
The Tree Within. The Tree Within is a kind of a fat book. I never thought it will go to 543 pages. And I was thinking that I will keep it to a 200-page book. It ended up, that is the beauty of research. Once you go in, it becomes a labyrinth.
So, Indranil, what inspired you to write this book? And would like those of who are watching this video and who may not know about Octavio Paz to talk a little bit about him and this book that you've written.
Well, Octavio Paz is Mexico's only Nobel laureate Nobel laureate writer. He won the Nobel Prize in 1990, and he is now looking back at the 20th century. We can safely say he's one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. In my opinion, he's the second greatest after T.S. Eliot of the 20th century, and so. He deals with some of the key concerns of the 20th century, the themes of the 20th century. Much of his poetry is about the times that he lived in, the central dramas of his country, of the nation, and searching for the self through its encounter with other cultures, other places. And we always know ourselves through our meeting with others, right? And so this is what Octavio Paz was, a great cosmopolitan figure. He is a kind of a history in itself. In himself, he is a history because he went through great cultural movements. A large number of, practically all the cultural movements of the 20th century went through his life, and he evolved through them. And all those influences can be found in his poetry and his writings. So in any way, so that is Octavio Paz. He was a great poet, great essayist, as great an essayist as a poet. And also he did a lot of translation. And he was he was a tremendous activist. We find his life is full of activism. He was a diplomat. He was a professional diplomat. And it is his professional work as a professional diplomat that brought him to India, his contact with India and also other cultures. So he lived an amazingly intense life and a beautiful life. And so my book is trying to capture that engagement with India. And through Octavio Paz's engagement with India, we are talking about Latin America's engagement with India. The individual is not an individual. He is entire history speaking to another history, another civilization. That is what my book is about.
Fantastic. And the title drew my attention, The Tree Within, in the reel. So how did you arrive at the title and what does it signify?
Well, there is a book of Octavio Paz called Arbol Adentro, a collection of poems, which means tree within, but I called it The Tree Within, and slightly deviating from the title. But the tree is a tree. The concept of arbol, tree, is omnipresent in Octavio Paz's work, in his poetry and in his life. And a tree is something that grows within, right, from the seed. So in different moments of his writing, a tree comes to represent something different. He often famously said that he thought of his life as un cuento de dos jardines, a story of two gardens. One garden of his idyllic childhood in Mexico and the garden of his house in Delhi. These were the two, like the bookends of his life within which he existed. And he once also said that the only gardens that exist are the gardens that we carry within us. So trees, gardens, these are also interior landscapes. And India is something that grew within him over a period of time. Paz was in India twice on two diplomatic trips. The first trip was in 1952, very short, 6 months. He was at an inferior position in the diplomatic hierarchy. He was a second secretary. And it was a very bad experience. India was a very, very bad experience, partly because the circumstances of his own life. He was going through an extremely unhappy marriage. And he was very angry that he was sent to India. He did not want to come to India. India was his punishment posting for something that he did in Paris. He wanted to stay in Paris. And from Paris, his government gave him a punishment to send him as far as possible and send him to India. So it was a punishment posting. And so later in life, Octavio Paz said, for me, India was an accident. So he did not make friends. He did not have a place. He lived in a hotel room. He could not tolerate the heat. Everything went wrong in his first trip. And the letters testify that he just wanted to get out of India. But 10 years later, he came back to India in 1962. He would stay here till 1968. And those 6 years were the most glorious years of his life. And he fell in love with India so deeply that he loved India till his final breath. Even when he was dying in 1990 and he was recovering from cancer, even in his hospital bed, when he was convalescing, he was translating Sanskrit poetry into Spanish. So deep was the connection with India. To give you an idea, Octavio Paz scholars would agree that the India phase, 1962 to 68, was definitely the most bountiful, the most glorious period of his life, the most productive period of his life. And I sometimes think it is amazing because he was a full-time diplomat. He was an ambassador. He had plenty of parties at home. He had to attend plenty of parties. Sometimes for the entire semester, he used to go away to America, University of Cornell, as a professor, visiting professor. He traveled the length and breadth of the country, 4,000 kilometers in his car, mind you, in his black Cadillac. He used to travel up to Afghanistan, from Delhi to Afghanistan. He used to travel by car and come back by car. He went to Tamil Nadu by car. So incredible. And
in those days when connectivity wasn't as good as it is now.
Roads, can you believe? 1962, what were the roads like? And he had a very, very active love life. He fell in love in India. He called it his second birth. And one would think that the love life itself is all consuming. And he used to get about 50 letters a day. He used to constantly write letters to Mexico. Now, think about all this. This is enough for a life. In spite of this, between 62 to 68, he produced 2 books of essays: Alternating Current, Conjunctions and Disconjunctions. All are reflections about different aspects of India. We might say 3 collections of poetry, which are actually condensed into one collection called Ladera Este, East Slope, which incorporates Hacia el Comienzo, which means towards the beginning, and Blanco, very, very experimental poetry. So these are collectively called Ladera Este. He wrote, apart from this, a book of travel through Rajasthan, which he completed while in 1971 when he was in Cambridge, but it happened in India. It is called El Monogrammaticum, the Monkey Grammarian. He wrote the notes for a book that he wrote later, but all the notes were written in India, inspired by India, about the role of love in the history of poetry of love. And it is called La Doble Llama, the double flame, love and eroticism in poetry. And apart from while he was in India, so we are talking about so many books. And apart from that, later in life, he wrote a memoir about India, his India years, which actually does not deal with all the important things. He translated Sanskrit poetry. And while in India, he wrote about things that have nothing to do with India. He wrote a book on Marcel Duchamp, Appearance Stripped Bare. He wrote a book on Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist. And he wrote 2 major essays, one on the Spanish poet Luis Cernuda, another on his guru, André Breton. So this volume of work is superhuman to do that in 6 years. After all this that I said, of a life. So it is not only the volume of work, for the quality of the work, the quality of the poetry that came out of this time.
Right.
And I think when one is so passionate in love, he really believed that it is love that makes this possible. Love heightens creativity. True love and that love was so deep that you'll find the poetry that comes during his India period are extremely erotic poetry, and they are in fact some of the most erotic poetry you can ever come across in the history of literature. And that is there, and I think that inspired him to he was people who witnessed him said that when he moved from one room to another, it felt like a electric current. Many people, I heard it from somebody who at the age of 10 went with the mother to Octavio Paz, and she felt that he was like an electric current. His life was like that. He was constantly on fire. His mind was constantly on fire. So that is what my book is about.
So it's interesting you tell all this, Indranil, because my next question was about how would you describe Octavio Paz's relationship with India during his years here? And of course, you have mentioned quite a lot of things, but since you have read extensively about him, so any other things, any other thing of importance that you would feel you can share to which can really symbolize or capture Octavio Paz's relationship with India?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to it. First, even before I get into those two aspects, one is I would like to say that though India has been an inspiration for many artists across the centuries, I think no Western artist or any artist who is not Indian, there is any example other than Octavio Paz of such a deep engagement with Indian culture. India was a muse to Octavio Paz in all its aspects. So this deserved a book. This deserved a very special place in our history. He is part of our cultural history. And second, now there are two ways of looking at Octavio Paz's engagement with India. One is the way India impacted him. Indian literature, Indian religions, Indian philosophical, contemplative traditions. He was not a religious man at all, but he loved religion. He sometimes said that the poetry, he found rituals very beautiful, ideas in religion very beautiful, and they could be turned into poetic advantage, right? So he once said that the poetry of religion should become the religion of poetry. And so that was one way of how he was deeply immersed in Buddhism, to such an extent that once he wanted to convert to Buddhism, he told one of his close friends he wanted to convert to Buddhism. And his friend said, not at all. You're not the kind of person. You're too much in love with life to embrace Buddhism. You're too much in love with language to embrace Buddhism. And so luckily that person kept him away from Buddhism. But he wanted to have a full embrace with Buddhism. And this is the first aspect, his engagement and how India becomes a presence in his work, not only inspiring him, not only the immersive experience of Buddhist thought, of Hindu philosophical texts. His favorite philosophers were Dharmakirti, poet philosophers in Sanskrit literature, Dharmakirti, Nagarjuna, and his favorite poet in Sanskrit literature was Bhartrihari. So, and he was very much into Kalidasa, so the classical Indian literature, but he was also had a personal relationship with contemporary writers of his time. So what happened is that while India impacted him deeply, he also impacted India. His house became a virtual meeting place of the finest minds of the time. So we find great painters, a large number of painters who would become stalwarts of Indian art. They would visit his house very frequently. They would find inspiration. And most people, when they talk about Octavio Paz, the first time they met Octavio Paz, they talked about it like an experience, or in deepening their knowledge of their self. Every conversation was so enriching. So that was one thing, and it left an impact in the lives of many people. He played a very important role. In fact, an important document called the 1890 group exhibition, and I have argued in my book that catalog, that manifesto of the 1890, which is an important document in the art history of India, was actually written by Octavio Paz. You can see the English is full of Spanish syntax. You know how when the Spanish people write English, you can see something is going wrong. I mean, some words are being misused, written with the Spanish syntax. So you can easily see that the entire thing is written by Octavio Paz, though it went in the name of Swaminathan. Jagdish Swaminathan was his best friend. And places he visited, experiences he had are kind of talismans. They become souvenirs of passionate moments. They are present. Rishikesh, there is a poem on Rishikesh, a poem on Cochin, so different places. Travancore appears, different places appear in his poetry. So India is a constant presence in his. But even after he left India, images of India would come back into his poetry. But what is interesting also for me is that the way his house became a meeting place, so he impacted the lives of others. He became a mentor to an entire generation of creative figures in India. Not only that, because he was here, many foreign artists used to come and stay, and he used to host them. And they saw India through him. And I have shown it with my documents, with evidence, that some of the most avant-garde artistic works in America were actually cultivated in India. John Cage, the great music composer, Merce Cunningham, the great dancer, Robert Rauschenberg, the great painter, they were all sitting together at the Sarabhai house, and they were talking about silence. And these experiences went into their work, went into and fed into a program where Cage put the music in New York. It was happening. Cage did the music. Octavio Paz wrote the lyrics. Merce Cunningham died. So the extent to which this became a kind of a cross-pollination, a point of cross-pollination of the arts. It is incredible, and it is very wrong if we forget this moment. It is such an important cultural moment that does not exist anymore. Nobody thinks of India as a culture like that, and as such a creative impact it can have on people's lives. So my book deals with that. And for example, the great the Argentine writer, Julio Cortázar, some of your viewers may know about this writer, Cortázar. Cortázar stayed 1 month in Octavio Paz's house. And in one letter that he wrote to a friend in Paris from Delhi, he wrote, "En Nueva Delhi hay el sol y hay Octavio Paz. In New Delhi, there is the sun and there is Octavio Paz." So that was the kind of impact. And they saw India through them, and the thrill that they had in spending their time in India, the experiences. And he used to give them lectures before they went out to see anything. So all these impacted Cortázar. Back in Spanish American literature, there is an influence of India. There's an interest in India, thanks to Octavio Paz.
Right. So, when we talk about Octavio Paz's poetry, Indranil, and his thought, in what ways did India influence his poetry? If you can delve a little bit more into his works and the influence that he took from India as a country in his work.
As I said, that there are places, names of places and people appear in his film. There are in his poems. There are poems that are dedications to specific people. But more than that, you see, Octavio Paz is a very complex writer. In him, surrealism meets existentialism, meets Indian mysticism, Indian religious tradition, contemplative traditions. I don't want to call it mysticism. So all these traditions, they mix up and create. For example, I'll give you one example. It converts to certain images. There is a small poem, not small, a very short poem. And there was a time when he used to write, during his first trip to India, he used to write long poems with very sinuous lines, long lines. But then after that, he went to Japan. And in Japan, he was in contact with the tradition of the haiku. And he learned minimalism. And after he comes back from Japan, suddenly his poetry becomes very concise, very precise, very short. And he loved that short poetry. In one of his poems, he writes, uh, it's called La Exclamación, exclamation. And he writes that stillness, not on the branch, in the air, not in the air, in the moment, hummingbird. Now, what does this mean? I think this little poem, there's a whole world of emotion behind this simple poem. And there is India in that swimming little poem. Hummingbird, he had a beautiful garden in his house, and he used to see all these birds he has never met in his life, or plants he had never seen. And so there is this hummingbird moving around outside his window. And the hummingbird is a bird that is small and that flaps its wings so fast like a helicopter that it looks like it is standing still in the air. But it is actually moving. It looks still. Now think about this line. Stillness, not on the branch, in the air, not in the air, in the moment, hummingbird. What does he mean by that? How is it connected with India? He means this is what in Buddhism talks about as dhyan, the meditative state. One thinks about stillness outside, but that stillness is not a non-passivity. It is an intense activity of the mind through which you arrive at that moment of stillness and apparent passivity. So the hummingbird becomes a symbol of that. You see now? So what is dhyan? Just like what the nightingale was for John Keats, an aspirational state of being. He wanted to become like the nightingale. So the hummingbird was for Octavio Paz, an aesthetic ideal. So you see, these images of India, in this, you can see he has synthesized a large amount of Buddhist thinking, Hindu thinking into a visual image converted into poetry. We will find plenty of this in a large number of his poems. And he understood, for example, he understood the gods and goddesses of India, the multiplicity of gods and goddesses in India, not in the literal sense, but he understood that gods and goddesses are just like he once wrote this phrase that they are expressions of human possibilities. They are representations of human possibilities. So when he was leaving India, and he left India under certain, which I'll come to that very quickly, is that he resigned from his diplomatic services. And as India was receding, he wrote a poem the day before he had been to the Elephanta caves. And so he was staying with the image of the Shiva and the Parvati that he had seen in the Elephanta caves. Mm-hmm. So on the last day, the ship is moving away from India in Bombay, imagine from the gateway of India, and India is becoming covered with mist. India is receding from him. So this is the poem he writes, and I'm quoting only partially from him. He writes, the poem is called Invocation. Shiva and Parvati, we worship you not as gods, but as images of the divinity of man. Your whole being is a fountain where the lovely Parvati bathes, where she rocks like a graceful boat. Shiva and Parvati, the woman who is my wife, and I ask you for nothing. Nothing that comes from the other world. Only the light on the sea, the barefoot light on the sleeping land and sea. So here you see the images of Shiva and Parvati are internalized between he and his wife, is as it were embodying momentarily the image of Shiva and Parvati. So India works in his poetry in different ways, synthesized within other bodies of thought. When he left India is an act of rebellion against his own government, because to support the student movement that broke out in Mexico in 1968, and his own government, whom he told the president on the phone, whatever happens to the students, do not use force. Do not. And the president had told him that he will never use force, because we know that in 1968 is the year of the student rebellions in Berkeley, in Paris, in India. So, but he heard on the on the radio, BBC radio, that the government of Mexico has fired students, and there was a massacre, and it is still debated. More than 300 students had died in that massacre. It is called the Tlatelolco massacre. It is still discussed today. As a rebellion against his own, as a protest against his own government's brutal action, he resigned. What is beautiful about this is that when he resigned, he got tremendous solidarity in India. It was international news that Octavio Paz has resigned from the diplomatic services. And when he came back, he was in Himachal, in Kasauli, when he did this. And he came back. By the time he came back in Delhi, he found that his house was outside his gate. There were many young boys and girls waiting to congratulate him for his resignation. And then complete strangers would visit him. All his friends used to come and say that, great job, great, we respect you more than ever for resigning from your position. When he was going back by train, you had to go back from Delhi to Bombay, and from Bombay you had to take the ship. And when he took the train, he went to the Delhi railway station, and he found at the railway station there was a whole group of students and people, a crowd of people waiting to garland him because he's leaving the country. And then not only that, in the Pashchim Express, in every train junction, there were people waiting with garlands to serenade him. And even I checked up the railway timetable, at 2:30 at night, it reached the Baroda junction. In Baroda junction, some of the artists at the Baroda School of Art, they came to the station. And they serenaded him. They went inside the train with sweets and marigold flowers. It's very ironic because marigold flowers have come to India from Mexico, and we give marigold flowers to Mexico. And so it was absolutely overwhelming. And his wife once said that he got the respect that is in India usually gives it to its spiritual gurus. He became a poet guru. So India loved him as much. He was close with Jawaharlal Nehru, and even the photos speak. There are plenty of photos in my book. They speak for themselves. Indira Gandhi. I mean, he smokes in front. You can see him smoking. Who smokes in front of Indira Gandhi? That kind of thing. So he had a very nice relationship with her, and many other people, the entire family, many others. And he had got scholarships for Indian artists to study in Paris, to study in Mexico. Satish Gujral, he selected Satish Gujral to work with the great Mexican muralists like Diego Rivera, Orozco Siqueiros. And he came back with a tremendous impact of the muralist movement. So all this had an impact on India and the mural movement, thanks to Octavio Paz sending Satish Gujral to Mexico. Anyway, so it is very deep. His engagement with India, it is the deepest engagement that any major Western artist has had with India.
Fantastic. Indranil, we've spoken a lot about Octavio Paz, and no matter how much we speak, still there's so much more to listen, especially from someone like you who has read him so extensively. But moving ahead a little bit in the interview, and now coming to your book, The Tree Within, that you've written about Octavio Paz's journey and his years in India. what sources or archival materials were most important for your research about when you went about doing this book?
Well, firstly, it took me a lot of time to take stock of all his writing because his writing runs to 13 volumes, right? So, to find out and pick up wherever India is appearing in some form and to take stock about when he was doing what, the biography of it, the chronology of his life. And to understand it, that itself took me 6 or 7 months. And to create a bibliography, and that itself was a huge task. And apart from that, of course, the original text, the texts that he wrote, all these books, each of them have traces of India in them. So textual studies, textual analysis is a primary source of analysis. But apart from that, I had to read. He is a writer about whom a lot has been written. To give you an idea, there are 256 doctoral theses on Octavio Paz in English, French, Portuguese, and other languages.
Of
I
course,
went
Spanish
through
as
all,
well.
I mean, Spanish, of course, Spanish, of course. And even now, this year itself, somebody is finishing her PhD. A French woman is finishing a PhD from Columbia University on Octavio Paz and India, the topic. And that itself, there are plenty of books written in Spanish. 80% of my material was in Spanish. So somebody who doesn't know Spanish good enough could not have done this book. So and any Indian, so that itself was limited. I was kind of ordained to write the biography of Octavio Paz. And secondly, is that so there is the textual sources. Then there is the criticism, what we call literary criticism. They ask these very specific research papers on specific topics, and all those had to be studied. Then there were these letters. He wrote plenty of letters. Letter is such a wonderful point of entry, gives an entry into a human being's mind. And then the most important thing for me were the declassified diplomatic archives. I'm the first person to whom those documents have been opened up. The declassified documents in Spanish. That is the documents when, as ambassador of India, the documents that he was writing, the secret reports about India to his government, because he did not need to care about what the Indians will think. He wanted to have plain speak to his government about India. So those documents became available. And what were the clippings that he was sending? So it's a huge volume of material. So that is a very special source of my archival research. And then I have, when you are researching one human being, the human being is like a neural network from whom there are other lives are connected. So one has to go to the lives of other people. Suppose I'm writing on John Cage, the music composer. So it is not only about Octavio Paz archives. I'm looking at John Cage archives all around the world. So in America, in London, in Canada, there were beautifully preserved John Cage archives, biographies of John Cage, what he's talking about Octavio Paz, their experiences in India, Robert Rauschenbach. So it opens up with a large number of lives. That is why I have opened my book with a quotation from Salman Rushdie, and where he says in Midnight's Children, "To know me, just the one of me, you will have to swallow the lot as well." Which means that to know one life, you have to know an entire society, a sea of lives. To know one life, no life is autonomous. No life exists on its own. To know me, only the one of me, you will have to swallow the lot as well. Anyway, so this is my research. To know Octavio Paz, you have to swallow a sea of material around other people's lives because of the light that they throw on him.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic, Indranil, how you put this into perspective as a researcher. And so, while doing a research, while writing about him and writing this book, did you uncover any surprising or little known aspects of Paz's life in India? Of course, you have mentioned quite a lot in the earlier questions about Octavio Paz's life in India. But while doing the research, anything that came to you which surprised you?
Many things, you'll have to read the book for that.
Hmm.
Many things, good and bad and scandalous, all of that is there, but I'm not going to give it away. But two very important things that Indians need to know about is that he was the person who started the Green Revolution in India, but it has been usurped by the American agencies, the role of the Green Revolution. So I have all the documentation for some to study about it and to pursue the matter. But it is very well documented that Mexico played a very important role in India's Green Revolution. Secondly, the thing that he played a very important part in the Goan liberation of Goa, in the liberation of Goa. Goa was liberated earlier, but the change of power, that handover from the Portuguese government to the Indian government involved, there were lots of hiccups. And he was the person who was the third party intermediary between the Indian government and the Portuguese government. So he had a very important role to play in the liberation of Goa. So these are things that not many people know about. These came out of archival, these diplomatic archives.
Right. And if we talk about Pass's description of India as a mirror and a labyrinth within quotes, no, how do you interpret Octavio Pass's description of India as a mirror and a labyrinth?
Mirror in the sense that he said that from the time he came to India, everything he saw in India reminded him of Mexico. He once said, I know what it means to be an Indian because I'm a Mexican. Right? So this is mirrors, labyrinths are very common metaphors in his poetry. And we find that, and there is a reason for that. As we said in the beginning, the concept of the garden as a kind of almost there is an inwardness, interiority in that notion of the garden. And he connected the garden in India with the garden in it. This garden kind of mirrored the other garden of his life. So mirroring happens at every stage of life. Even when we love somebody, that other person is a mirror of us, right? Is kind of through that person you see yourself. And so it happens in many levels. It happens at mirroring happens at many levels of the mirroring of the self. And Octavio Paz loved the word otro, the other. This other is not like the cultural other always. It is the other within oneself, the neglected self. So you are dialoguing with your inner self also, that other that you discover within yourself. So in that sense, it is when you look in front of the mirror, you want to India is like, he said, India is like a mirror, and I look into it and I see myself. So, and the labyrinth, yes, because in his book on Levi Strauss, he wrote about it, that India is like a cauldron. Once you get into it, it cannot come out. So this is what he meant, that he was very fascinated with archaeology, and he knew that in India he will never finish all the archaeological sites. Exploring how far, the deeper you go into India, the deeper it opens up pathways of exploration. And the world of Sanskrit literature is vast. The world of contemporary reality is vast. Knowing people, the kind of exciting people that he met in India. So on every level, he felt that India kind of opened up his mind like no place in the world ever did.
Right. Very interesting. My next question to you is, what do you think is the lasting significance of Octavio Paz's time in India for his global legacy? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, it is the most important, I think, is the fact is that here we find in Octavio Paz a direct bridge between Latin America and India. A dialogue, because all our dialogue with the West is mediated through Europe and America, right? We so there is this concept of the West with a capital W, and the West as a geographical hemisphere. You have to know that Mexico is a geographically West, but it is culturally non-West. So there is this ambiguity in that, and Octavio Paz all the time was aware of the critical distancing with the West, cultural West. And so here one is looking at Indian history and comparing it with Aztec history. Without, you see, so there is a direct framework of reference, what we today call the global South, South-South dialogue. So nowadays in academia, it is very fashionable to talk about South-South dialogue. Nobody embodies the South-South dialogue in literature, in poetry, through poetic insight than Octavio Paz. And his insights on Indian thoughts is amazing. You have to read his essays, and some of his essays are difficult. And his essays are extraordinarily insightful about India. Sometimes you are surprised what an amazing thing he has said, that no Indian has observed this. So he is a kind of a different point of view, and it is coming up all the time. I mean, this year's Booker Prize winner Kiran Desai, Booker Prize nominee shortlisted writer Kiran Desai, she said that she was inspired by Octavio Paz's insights on India, right? So there are people, I mean, Ramchandra Guha wrote about, just last week, he wrote about, he brought back the Octavio Paz's political writings on Palestine. And he found that he was he endorsed his opinions in 1980s, what Octavio Paz had written about his political opinions. He did a lot of political writing. He has written about 1,000 pages of political essays. And so he is there. I mean, Octavio, poets don't die. We die. Poetry doesn't die, right? Great poets don't die. So Octavio will stay alive. His poetry will stay alive. And the value of poetry is poetry, not about what is he talking about. I mean, its ability to surprise us with language, with insight, with beauty. So that is the truest legacy, apart from this boring academia about South-South dialogue that I'm talking about. But the most important thing is that of course, his India section is a part of his entire poetic oeuvre, right? So there is a lot of, you have to go into his larger body of work. And I think his value is increasing with time. I think his stature is increasing with time. So it will continue to increase. He's very much around, guaranteed legacy.
And I'm pretty sure that this book will contribute in that progress of and process of him becoming always omnipresent, even many years after his death. We come to the end of this fascinating interview, chat, conversation with you, Indranil, and would like to know that how has writing this book, The Tree Within, how has this changed, if at all, your own understanding of Octavio Paz and of India? Has it contributed to changing your understanding a bit?
Of course, yes. Of course, yes. I've been reading Octavio Paz for many years. You're right. So his greatest works in prose are not the ones in India. One is the Labyrinth of Solitude, which is a reflection on the nature of the Mexican character, which has become a classic, of course. It's masterpiece. And his great masterpiece is his work called Traps of Faith, his biography of Sor Juana, the 17th century Mexican nun and poet. And that is his sublime masterpiece. And of course, delving into great works, I mean, there are writers, writing a book like this exhausts you, completely exhausts you. And then you feel that when the book comes out, you are done. But I don't think I'm done. It is a great pleasure to be immersed in a poet. I call Octavio Paz Octavio by his first name. I know him because I've been close with people who are close with him, his close friends. I've been talking to his close friends, and they refer to him as Octavio. So I have also started talking about Octavio Paz as Octavio. And in Bengali, anyway, we refer to writers by their first names. We never call Tagore. We always call Rabindranath. We always say Buddhadev. We always say whatever, the Bunkim. We never call them by their last name. This is a Western habit of calling people by their last names. In Bengal, we always call writers by their first names, writers, painters. So for me, he's Octavio, and that is my way of endearing myself to him. Every time I go to Delhi, I go and stand into his house, the place that he stayed, which has remained exactly the same as he left it, 13 Prithviraj Road. I go and hover around that house, and I imagine he's calling out to me, asking me to come in, you know. So it is a kind of, I hallucinate him almost. So yeah, it is a very deeply fulfilling experience, deeply fulfilling, that enrich a life enhancing experience, you might say. And also, working on something like this gives you tremendous intellectual discipline. It's like crossing a huge mountain. Every chapter was like crossing a huge mountain because you're sifting through huge amount of material to create an engaging narrative. My purpose, my aim in life was to move out of academic writing, because academic, nobody reads those difficult essays that you write. I write essays that nobody reads. My research papers, nobody reads them. Very few people read them. And that happens with all people. But I wanted to write something that people will enjoy, that will be accessible, without sacrificing intellectual rigor, making it emotionally warm, readable, accessible. I hope my book has achieved that. Any curious reader can access this book, enjoy this book. So that is the point, and it is far more satisfying for a book to be published by when it is published by Penguin, it has a large distribution, and now I'm looking forward to a Spanish edition and a French edition and a German edition.
Fantastic. Fantastic. That's wonderful. So once again, I urge all my viewers who live in Delhi to please be there on the 11th of November at Instituto Cervantes in Connaught Place, where the book will be presented and launched at, I think it's around 5:30 in the evening, if I'm not wrong.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock at Cervantes, but this session will be in Spanish.
Yeah.
The next day, 12th of November, it will be at JNU School of Languages, SL2. That will be obviously in English. That is at 4 o'clock, 12th November, 4 o'clock at JNU.
Right. So, so those who are interested in any of the two events can please go there and get to meet Indranil, the writer himself, and get a copy of that book as well. So, thank you so much, Indranil, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. One can go on and on talking about Octavio Paz and about your own writing. Maybe in another moment, would like to cover more about your work as well.
Sure, it is my pleasure to talk, and it is always a talk to you and talk about Octavio Paz, my work. It is always an endearing experience.
Great, thank you so much. Y hasta el siguiente capítulo de Español por Dentro. Chao.
Ciao.